Hello from me, Lazar. We continue with the lessons from the free CSS course. We are currently on the 5th chapter, working with text in CSS. Open the PDF file. As we already mentioned in the HTML chapters, text is one of the most important parts of an HTML page, and its good layout is also very important, so we will start the real work with CSS first with the text. Let's start with point 1, fonts. One of the most important things about text in an HTML page is choosing the right font or fonts. This must be approached carefully and precisely, taking into account the goals and potential audience of the site. Another important thing is that you shouldn't use too many fonts, because then you don't get a good effect. Up to 2 or 3 fonts is recommended. One good practice is to use one font for headings and a second font for the rest of the text. Types of fonts. Depending on the type of characters, there are 2 types of fonts, serif and sans serif. Serifs are the added decorative strokes and swirls that are placed and drawn at the ends of letters. In CSS, fonts are divided into families, each of which consists of a set of fonts with similar properties. There are 5 such font families, they are detailed here. The property that serves to specify what fonts will be used for a given element is font family. Browsers add default properties for each element, so if we don't specify a property, it will use the default properties. In CSS, the font property is used to work with fonts. This is a shorthand version of the following font properties: font family, which specifies the font, or more precisely, the font family. If the font consists of more words, it is enclosed in quotation marks, like for example, Times New Roman. Basically, as you can see, we write about 3 fonts. As the browser works in the following way: first it looks for the first font, if it exists, it executes it. If it doesn't exist, it looks for the second, if it doesn't exist either, it sets the default font. Just to say, in this case, the fonts we've mentioned are what's called web-safe fonts. Because these are the most commonly used fonts out there on every computer, or almost every one. Font size, in every operating system, sets the size of the font or font family. The values can be in the units of measurement used in HTML and CSS, for example, pixels, which are the most commonly used. The default font size in browsers is 16 pixels by default. Font size can also be set as a percentage, where the percentage is calculated relative to the parent element, for example 100%, which is 16 pixels unless otherwise specified. And this unit that we talked about, 1em, is equal to 100% of the parent element, so in most browsers it's 16 pixels. For example, 200% is 32px. There is also an option to set the font size with function words. Here's what exactly these service words are, here's an example with the different variations, and here's what we'll see in the browser, and these are the most important properties of font. There are a few more that you can see here briefly. Anyone who wants to can look at them in more detail in the PDF file. The font property, this property gives the opportunity in one declaration to set all of the font properties we've looked at, plus some additional. When using it, there are some features that are mentioned here. We will not go into them in detail, but in the PDF file you can see them. Here's an example. Here I've looked at it in two paragraphs. In the first we set two properties, in the second more. Additional fonts. In some cases we can add different non-standard fonts to our site, which is mostly suitable for titles. We have two options for this: to download from the internet suitable web fonts, or to use such fonts from the Google Fonts collection. We need to keep in mind some pitfalls that may arise when using such fonts. First, that they may not be free and open to use. Second, the site will probably load slower because the font will have to load first. The font format should be one of the most commonly used. The property used in CSS that tells the browser the name of the font, and where to load it from, is called font face. It should be placed at the beginning of the CSS declaration. Here's one such example. So, the second point is CSS properties for formatting text. As we've already mentioned, content is the most important thing on a web page, and no matter how much we decorate a site, if its content isn't interesting to people, the site won't be successful. And the bulk of the content on every website, with some exceptions, remains text, of course. CSS can't help you write beautiful text on your site, but the role of CSS is to help you design your site well, including the text on it. For text layout in CSS, various properties are used, the most important of which are: the first property is line height. We have already looked at this property along with the property font size, so we won't go into detail about it. It's related to line spacing. Here's one such scheme, in which this is very clearly visible. So, the next property is text align. By text alignment, we mean its horizontal alignment. You've probably seen it in word processing programs like Writer or Word. There are 4 types of alignment: left, center, right, and justified. Here is an example of such alignment. The next property is text indent, which is used to change the indent of the first paragraph. How much should it be? Here's an example where there's a different indentation. The text decoration property is used to set text decoration. Before CSS 3, it could accept the following values. Here's an example. The code is as follows, and in the browser we will see the following. In CSS 3, the text decoration property is divided into 3 basic parts: line, color, and style, as line is mandatory. It can be, for example, of this type in the style of the line. So, the text transform property is used to transform text. If it is not enabled, by default the text is normal. Using this property we can convert all letters to uppercase or lowercase, or the first letter to uppercase. The letter spacing property is used to adjust the spacing between letters. It can take the following values, normal or some value specified in pixels, millimeters, centimeters, and others. The word spacing property is used to adjust the spacing between words. And it can also accept such values, normal or some length that is specified in one of these units. The next point is, setting the color of the text, the color property. We have already covered the ways of setting colors in web pages in Chapter 10 of HTML. As we mentioned there, colors in an HTML document can be specified in several ways, by using RGB values, hex values, English names, and there were also more modern ones. In CSS3 there is a new model, HSL value, and also the possibility to set transparency in both models, RGB and HSL, with the alpha channel. Where it uses a fraction of 0 to 1. To set the color of the text in CSS, the color property is used, as it is written to the element, to which it will apply. Here is an example where we use all of the above methods. The code is as follows, and in the browser we will see the following. These are the main properties for working with text that we have covered in this lesson. For more information, you can visit this address, on W3 School. That's all for this lesson. Best regards.